Previously on Wentworth, Officer Janet Latham met up with a strange man who wants her to get Ruby and Rita transferred to Blackwall where he will deal with them. Who is this person and why does he want to harm Rita and Ruby? We also learned that Janet has a mysterious sister who is already behind bars. Lou had a visit with her brother Travis, who is in serious trouble with gambling debt and wants his sister to escape and come away with him. Lou conspired with Janet Latham to help Lou escape, but Lou has to do one thing: create a diversion in the yard to give Janet enough time to set Ruby up for Zaina's murder. Lou wanted one more thing from Janet: some cleaning acid. Frankie has offered to help form an appeal on Boomer's sentence, and Boomer has decided to make some homebrew to make some money on the side. And evil new character Denise Tyler has just been charged with the multiple murders of babies and also the abuse on baby Grace, and is headed straight for Wentworth in secret. Vera received a USB stick in with her mail, and when she plugged it into her computer, Joan Ferguson pops up on the screen in a video saying, "Hello Vera." We cut straight at Vera's house where Vera is watching a video from Ferguson. Ferguson says, "Hello Vera, how are you? I know you're probably thinking to yourself, why am I sending this message? Well, I just wanted to thank you for keeping my escape quiet. I didn't know which way the ball was going to bounce after that fateful night. But it seems that everyone now thinks that I am perished in that bomb. You might not want to believe this, Vera, after everything we have done to each other, but I am grateful. I didn't have time to explain to you why I did what I did, but I have had time to reflect, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion, that Grace needs her mother. You probably don't know this, Vera, but my father killed my mother right in front of me. I was introduced to violence and cruelty early on in my childhood, and my father was a cruel man. I couldn't be close to anyone, and he made me the person that I became. But when I met you all those years ago, Vera, I thought I had finally made a connection with someone after Gianna. But when you turned your back on me, I was hurt, and I had never really felt hurt, well, not since the death of my mother. And I think that's why I reacted the way that I did. I don't blame you for anything, Vera. I just wanted you to know that. You will probably never see me again, but I did want to deliver you one final message. You may have seen on the news that Dr. Miller has gone missing. Well, I can assure you, Vera, I had nothing to do with his disappearance. I know that news report might have freaked you out a little bit, but I didn't want you thinking it was me. That's all I have to say, just go be a good mother to Grace. The video then ends and Vera has a tear in her eye. We then cut to a secluded area with a derelict building where we see Dr. Miller chained to a wall and gagged. And he is in one hell of a state. In the doorway stands Joan Ferguson, who's watching Dr. Miller in a menacing way. We then cut to the prison van arriving at Wentworth in the dead of night with Denise Tyler inside. Will is there when she gets out of the van with the minister and a few officers, who take Denise straight down to isolation where she will be alone and kept secret from the women. Morning arrives and Will is holding a staff meeting telling everyone that Denise Tyler is in the new isolation block. And from now on, any meetings with Denise will be held down in isolation. That includes any meetings with the police. Also, Denise's food will now be brought in from the outside, and the officers will be delivering her meals to her because we cannot risk the women in the kitchen finding out that we have someone in isolation. The officers all grumble, and Linda says, "How long is this going on for?" And Will replies, "Just until her court date, which hasn't been set yet as the police are still investigating including the bodies that were found at her house. Vera and Jake walk into the meeting and they catch the tail end of Will's announcement. Will turns to both Vera and Jake and tells them both to keep away from isolation while Denise is in there. Vera then replies saying, "I am the general manager, Will. I will go anywhere in this prison that I choose," and Vera then walks off. In the laundry, and Boomer is telling all the women that her home brew is coming along nicely and to get their orders in. Lou then turns around and says, "I suppose it's pointless me putting in an order, Booms." And Boomer replies saying, "Yes, Lou, you would be right. You're not having any of my brew." Ali speaks to Rita, asking if there's been any news on Denise Tyler being brought to Wentworth. And Rita says that she hasn't heard anything. She's probably gone to Blackmore. Ali then says, "Fingers crossed. Where's Ruby, by the way?" And Rita says she's having a meeting with her solicitor and we are hoping that it's going to be some good news. Janet Latham then walks into the locker room to start her shift, where she sends a text message to the mystery man saying it will be done today. Janet then walks down the corridor where she sees Lou. Lou asks Janet if she's got what she asked for, and Janet says yes, it's hidden in the library behind some home improvement books. Lou then says, "Good girl." Janet replies saying, "Shut it, Kelly. Do you know what you're doing this afternoon?" And Lou says, well, I'm still trying to decide what I'm going to do to create this diversion, but it all depends on how big you want it to be." Janet replies saying, "It has to be big, Kelly. I don't want anyone near the shower blocks during the afternoon period, so make it good." Lou says, okay, well at least Connors won't be able to blame me for poor Zaina's demise if I'm out in the yard with them. So you go and have fun, Miss Latham. A new trainee officer arrives at reception in Wentworth called Artie Birdsworth. Liz's son Artie has taken the career option to become a prison officer. When he arrives at reception, he meets Linda, who takes him to Will's office where they shake hands. Will asks Artie to take a seat and they have a chat. Will says that it's great to have him here, and Artie replies saying it's great to finally be here. Will says that he was sorry about his mum, and goes on to say that she was well loved in this prison, not just by the women but also the officers. Artie says thank you. I think after the last time I saw mum I was very lost, but it made me realize what path I wanted to choose, and I'm here to try and help the women to start a better life for themselves. I may not have been able to help my mum, but at least I can now help others. Will then says that he's really pleased to hear that. He then calls Linda back into the office and tells Artie that he is going to be shadowing Linda this week, who is going to help him and show him the ropes. Lou heads to the library where she finds a small can of caustic soda that Janet has left for her, and Lou grabs it and heads down to her cell, but she spots Linda and Artie walking up the corridor and hides, where she ends up overhearing Linda and Artie talking about a secret prisoner, Denise Tyler, in the isolation block as they walk past. Lou then runs back to her cell and hides the acid. Vera heads down to isolation where there is an officer guarding. The officer says to Vera that he can't let her in, and Vera replies saying, "I can do whatever I want, and if you value your job, you will go and take a smoko out by the fire exit and keep away." The officer then walks off to the fire exit and Vera opens the gates to isolation. Jake sees Janet patrolling H block and asks her if she's seen Vera anywhere, to which Janet says, "I think I saw her heading down to isolation," and Jake is like, "Oh no," and makes a run for it. We cut back to isolation where Vera opens Denise's door. Denise is sitting on her bed and looks up at Vera and says, "Oh, look who it is." Vera just stands in the doorway with a really angry look on her face and just stares at Denise in silence. Denise then says, "How is your baby, Miss Bennett?" Vera then says, "Don't you even mention my baby." And Denise says, "Why not? Your baby is a screaming, whining brat who got what she deserved." Vera then says, "You really are a monster, aren't you? I thought I'd seen it all, but you really are the lowest of the low, hurting and killing defenseless babies." And Denise says, "Yeah, that's right, I am the baby killer, the twisted psychopath as the news reporters are calling me." But have you even asked yourself why? Vera then says, what did any of those babies ever do to you? Denise then says that they ruined her life. She goes on to say that she didn't want to run that baby care nursery, it was forced onto her by her batshit mother. She says that she used to scream at me too when she was rotting away with cancer. Vera then starts to shake with temper as Denise says, do you know what it's like? Being abused by your own mother, screaming day in, day out, spitting food at you while they rot away in bed. Vera then has some flashbacks to her mother when she was dying. Denise then says, I couldn't take anymore, and when I took over the family business, the screaming continued. I may not have been able to shut my rotten mother up, but I was able to shut those babies up. Vera then says that you are sick. Denise then stands up and says, yes, I'm sick. I was sick of your baby Grace, screaming and crying all day, every day. I only wish I'd finished her off like I did with the others. Vera then sees red, and she smacks Denise right in the face, causing Denise to fall onto the bed. Vera then jumps on top of Denise and starts hitting her, calling her a fucking monster. Jake then comes running in and grabs Vera off Denise, saying, Vera, what are you doing? You know we're not allowed down here. Denise then turns to Jake and says, oh look, the proud father. Jake tells Denise to shut her mouth, but then Denise says, what's the matter, Jake? Don't you want to hear the gory details of what I did? Jake then turns to her and says, you better shut your mouth right now. And then Denise says, or what? What are you gonna do, Jake? Are you gonna throw me to the floor and stamp on me like I did to your ugly little brat? Jake then loses it, and he then pins Denise to the bed, puts his hand around her throat and starts choking her. Vera watches on in disbelief as Jake chokes Denise harder and harder. Jake starts to tell Denise that she doesn't know what he is capable of as he squeezes her throat so tight her life starts to leave her eyes. Vera continues to watch on, but then panics at what Jake is doing, and Vera grabs Jake off Denise and tells him to stop. Jake then lets go, and Denise starts to cough violently as she gets her breath back. Jake then says, don't you ever mention Grace to me ever again, otherwise you're dead. Vera then grabs Jake out of the cell and they both leave. The officer comes back from the fire exit and Vera tells him that we were never here. Vera then takes Jake to her office and Jake apologizes to Vera, saying that he didn't mean it, he just saw red. Vera then says, don't worry, so did I. We should have listened to Will. We both have to keep away from her while she's here. Promise me, Jake. Jake then says that he promises. Vera goes on to say that Grace needs both of us to look after her. Jake then looks at Vera and kisses her. Vera pulls back in disbelief and there's a moment of silence while they both look at each other in each other's eyes. Vera then grabs Jake passionately and passionately kisses him, and the pair of them end up in a passionate embroil on Vera's desk. The women head back to their units and Zaina joins the H1 girls while they wait for Ruby to come back from her meeting, who's been gone for quite some time now. Rita tells the girls that she hopes everything is okay. Linda comes in with trainee officer Artie Birdsworth and Linda introduces him to the women. Boomer has a shocked look on her face and says, Artie Birdsworth, are you Liz's son? And Artie says, yes, Liz was my mum, Jenkins, and Boomer then panics and runs into her cell to hide. Artie then looks at Linda and says, what's wrong with her? Lou then sneaks into the laundry while the women have gone, and she goes over to the corner locker where Boomer is hiding her home brew. Lou then pours the caustic soda acid into Boomer's home brew, and Lou whispers to herself, have some of this, girls, on me. Back in Boomer's cell, and Artie comes in to see her, asking her what's wrong. Boomer nervously says, I just came in here looking for, something. Artie then says, look, Jenkins, I know what happened with you and my mum. Boomer then says, you do? Artie then says, yes, I don't blame you for anything. Look, Mum was dying. She told me everything on our last visit and we said our goodbyes. I shouldn't really say this to you, Jenkins, but what you did for my mum was kind. And Boomer cannot believe what she's hearing, and she says, "Do you really think that?" And Artie says, "Yes, Jenkins. I've started my career here at Wentworth because I want to help you and the rest of the prisoners because I couldn't help my mum." Boomer then says, "Oh, I thought you were here to get some sort of crazy revenge on me." Artie then bursts out laughing and says, No, Jenkins, don't worry, you are quite safe. From what I hear, my mum was a big support group to the women in here. Well, maybe now I can be." Boomer then says, "Yeah, maybe you will be," and gives Artie a little cheeky smile before Artie leaves Boomer's cell. Back at the derelict building, and Joan is taking Dr. Miller's gag off his mouth. Dr. Miller tells Joan he needs some water, which Joan gives to him. Dr. Miller then tells Joan that she can't keep him here forever. Joan replies saying, "Oh, don't worry, Dr. Miller, you won't be." He then says, "What are you planning on doing with me? You know you can't get away with this, right?" Joan then uses a mirror to have a wash, and while she's doing this, she tells Dr. Miller that if he hadn't conspired with Mr. Jackson to have her sent over to Sinclair for the criminally insane, then none of this would be happening. Joan then looks at Dr. Miller on the ground and says, "If you think my urge with Eve Wilder was wild, well, you're in for a treat. What I did with Eve Wilder was just child's play for what I have planned for you and Mr. Jackson." Dr. Miller says that he had nothing to do with Joan's transfer and that it was all Will's idea. Joan then says, "Do you think I'm stupid? Mr. Jackson took great delight in showing me the paper that you signed. It's funny really, you were both trying to get me committed to that god-forsaken place, and now I'm actually going to be working there." And as Joan says this, she puts on a blonde wig. She then turns to Dr. Miller and says, "Say hello to Karen Smith. What do you think, Dr. Miller?" Dr. Miller says that she will never get away with this, but Joan says, "But I have already. Where do you think I go all day? I've been working at Sinclair for weeks now as Karen Smith. I actually enjoy nursing those poor lost souls." Dr. Miller says that she's batshit crazy, and Joan says, "Yes, Dr. Miller, I might be a lunatic, but this lunatic has big plans, and once I've earned myself enough money from Sinclair, that's when the games are going to really begin," and gives Dr. Miller a cheeky smirk. Back at Wentworth, and Ruby is finally back from her meeting and skips into H1 full of smiles. Rita is like, "So, what happened?" Ruby then bursts out and says, "They are finally dropping all the charges, I'm going to get my parole." And all the women cheer and say that's amazing news. Ruby then looks over at a disappointed Zaina, and Ruby says, "What's the matter with you? Aren't you happy for me?" Zaina then says, "Yeah, of course I am. I'm just a bit gutted that I'm not going to be seeing you every day. I've still got 2 years left on my sentence." But Ruby says, "Hey, I will visit you as much as I can, and, you never know, I might be able to sweet talk Mr. Jackson into having conjugals with you." And Ruby gives Zaina a big hug. Janet Latham is just around the corner from H1 listening to Ruby's announcement, and she storms straight over to Lou Kelly. Janet tells Lou, "Right, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to get Linda and that new screw to pull Ruby in for a piss test while you're out in the yard, and you're going to keep everyone busy while I deal with Zaina." Lou then says, "Yeah, no worries, sugar tits, but how are you going to get Zaina to the shower block?" Zaina says, "Don't worry, I'm gonna stick her on extra cleaning duties, just as long as you know what you're doing." And Lou says, "Oh, don't worry, Miss Latham, I know exactly what I'm doing." "So, when are you gonna spring me from this dump?" And Janet says, "Don't worry, Kelly, you will get your reward after I've set up Mitchell." Ali is in the visitors room having a visit with her friend Sandy Edwards, where Sandy is asking Ali if she's heard anything about where Denise Tyler is being held. Ali says, "I thought Denise was sent to Blackmore," but Sandy says no, that was all a trap to divert all the protesters. They did send a van to Blackmore, which we all followed, but when the van got there it was empty, so they've shoved Tyler somewhere else. Ali says, "Well, there's been no mention of her in here," so Sandy replies, "That's okay, I just want to get my hands on that child murdering bitch." And Ali says, "Hey now, don't go doing anything stupid, leave Tyler to the women of whatever prison they've sent her to." Zaina goes to her cell and notices that her mobile phone has gone missing. She runs out of the unit and down the corridor where she bumps into Janet Latham. Janet tells Zaina that she's going to be doing some extra cleaning duties in the shower block as punishment for running in the corridor. Zaina turns around and says, "Are you actually serious?" To which Janet replies, "Oh yes, I'm very serious. Go and grab yourself a mop and bucket." The women all head out to the yard, but Janet then grabs Ruby and says, "Come with me, Mitchell, you're having a mandatory piss test." And Ruby's like, "Why? I don't even do drugs." And Janet says, "Just move it, Mitchell." Lou looks at Janet and gives her a little nod while the rest of the women all go into the yard. Janet then asks Linda and Artie to do a piss test on Mitchell. And Linda says, "Why can't you do it?" And Janet says, "I have to be somewhere else," and walks off. Linda then says, "Oh, okay Artie, welcome to your first piss test." And Artie is like, "Wait, me?" And Linda says, "Oh, don't worry, there's a curtain between us and the prisoner. Come on Mitchell, let's get this over with." Ali comes out into the yard and joins Rita and the girls at the table, and Ali tells Rita about her visit with Sandy, telling her that apparently nobody knows where Denise is being held. Lou overhears this conversation and decides to make an announcement. Zaina is alone in the showers, cleaning them out with her back to the door. Janet creeps in slowly, armed with a huge kitchen knife, and she's also wearing some gloves. She creeps towards Zaina slowly and slowly. We then cut back to the yard and Lou tells everyone that Denise Tyler is currently in Wentworth and the screws are holding her in isolation. The officers tell Lou to shut it, but Lou tells everyone that she overheard Smiles talking to the new screw, and the women can't believe what they are all hearing and they start getting mad. Lou then shouts out, "What are we gonna do, girls? Let's break down that fence and let's get the bitch." And the women then cheer and run at the fence where they start shaking it like crazy. Rita tries to calm down the situation, but it's too late. All hell breaks loose in the yard. Ruby is in the holding room with Miss Miles and Artie when the alarm goes off, and Linda tells Mitchell to go back to her unit, and Linda and Artie head to the yard. All the officers come storming and they grab the women, dragging them back from the fence and back into the building. Ruby gets back to H1 alone and goes into her cell wondering what on earth is going on. She notices that something is under her pillow, and when she lifts her pillow up, she sees a blooded knife which she has just touched. She quickly panics as the women are being dragged back into the unit, and she grabs the knife and hides it in a mattress. The women are all dragged back to their units and Vera orders a total lockdown of the prison. Janet comes up to Vera and says, "We have one missing. Zaina is nowhere to be found." Vera then says, "Okay, let's search the rest of this prison. I will go to the shower block and everyone else to check the work areas." Vera then heads down to the shower block, and before she even opens the door, she can see some blood coming from underneath. She opens the door and Vera is met with a very gruesome discovery. Zaina is dead and on the shower block floor in a massive pool of blood. Vera radios through the news while all the women are locked up, and Will, Jake and Janet all arrive on the scene. Vera orders everyone to search the cells. Someone clearly has a weapon and has done this to Zaina. So the officers immediately start searching the cells. Ruby doesn't even get a chance to tell Rita about her discovery in the cell before the officers descend. Everyone is ordered to stand at the doorways and Ruby is shaken. Linda and Artie both start searching Ruby's room where they find the blooded knife. Ruby's face drops and Linda comes out with the murder weapon. Everyone's faces are in shock and Rita says, "Ruby, what's going on?" Ruby then says she doesn't know how that got into her cell. She just found it before the officers started searching. Vera then orders the officers to take Ruby down to segregation until the police arrive. Rita then asks Vera, "What the hell is going on, Miss Bennett?" To which Vera replies, "Zaina has been murdered. We've just found her in the shower block." Rita then says, No, not a chance. Ruby wouldn't have done this." And Vera says, "I'm sorry, Rita. Ruby is gonna have to be questioned."